With the passing of President Jimmy Carter yesterday, this was something we've been preparing for about a year and a half. I don't know if you guys remember back in February of last year when it was announced that President Carter got into hospice. Somebody printed out, maybe Ursula printed like a 3 or 4 page kind of pre-obituary that was sitting here on this table here for months and months and months.
Yeah.
And then, he defied a lot of expectations and ended up living much longer than anybody thought. Passed his 100th birthday this past October. So when he was in hospice about a year and a half ago, we looked into the time, probably the most famous time for President Carter in the Northwest is when he visited this area right after the eruption of Mount St. Helens. It was 1980, it was election year. He would go on to lose the election that year. But as president, he came out to get a look at the devastation himself. He flew into Portland, and then he went to Kelso. They flew with a big armada of helicopters and everything. Then he went back to Portland to give a press conference. And some of the stuff he said sort of still stands out. I remember being, I guess I was 12 years old at the time. No, 11 years old at the time when this. And this is like indelible for me. This is President Carter talking about what he saw, what Mount St. Helens looked like from the helicopter.
I've never seen or heard of anything like this before. Somebody said it looked like a moonscape, but the moon looks like a golf course compared to what's up there. It is a horrible-looking sight.
Yeah, that was the famous quote that stuck with me about the moon looking like a golf course. And that 1980 election, Chris, were you? I mean, you're a little bit younger than me. I think, like a year or two younger than me. Were you paying attention to this kind of stuff like in 1980?
Well, we definitely were paying attention to his visit for St. Helens because we lived in Portland.
Yeah.
And, that was right fresh in our minds. And, of course, you don't get very many presidential visits to the Northwest very often, especially for a natural disaster of that kind. But as it was for politics, now I can't say I was really paying too much attention to what happened in November of 1980, but other than just going to school.
Yeah, and maybe President Carter was foreshadowing what would happen to him in the election when he talked about the absolute devastation.
The absolute and total devastation of a region that encompasses about 150 miles. It's the worst thing I have ever seen. It is literally indescribable, and it's a devastation. There is no way to prepare oneself for the sight that we beheld this morning. I don't know that there's, in recorded history in our nation, that there's ever been a more formidable explosion.
Yeah, and that was, we had Governor Dixie Lee Ray at that point. She failed in her re-election bid later that year. She lost in the primary to Jim McDermott. And then Senator Warren Magnuson lost to Slade Gorton. Big Republican landslide there. I think Carter got 37% of the vote in Washington and Reagan got 50%. We had that independent candidate, John Anderson, who took a big chunk away from both, probably more from Carter than from Reagan. But what I liked most about when Jimmy Carter visited is he had this sort of forward-looking, this notion of how we take Mount St. Helens for granted now as a big tourist attraction. Carter recognized that within just a few days of the eruption.
When safe places are fixed for tourists and others and scientists to come in and observe it, I would say there would be if you'll excuse the expression, a tourist attraction that would, equal the Grand Canyon or something. It's an unbelievable sight.
Pretty forward-looking to think about that, even in just the wake of a disaster like that. And actually, probably pretty correct, too.
Well, yeah, I didn't experience, obviously, the eruption. I was born in 96.
Stop rubbing that in.
But several times throughout my childhood, we would go down into the Mount St. Helens area and hike around. My dad and I would hike around the basin area, and seeing it is an incredible sight. And so, I think that forward thinking of being able to see it as, something that people could look back on and see kind of the historical significance, and was really probably one of the great qualities about him.
Yeah, and the next couple weeks ahead, prior to the inauguration of President Trump on January 20th, we have a state funeral for Jimmy Carter on January 9th. Incredible, these sort of rights of U.S. Government, stuff that only happens, I think the last time a former president died was when George H.W. Bush died in 2018. Before that, it was Reagan in 2004, so a lot of pageantry, and pomp and circumstance is the wrong phrase, but it's just these sort of rites of passage for a big democracy coming up here over the next few weeks with the passing of President Carter and then the inauguration of a new president later on in January. So